Ah, look! How exciting! Here we see a wild artist emerging from her nightly slumber. She's tired and not very agile at this time. Something she knows may cost her everything if not resolved. But not to fear, she has a simple solution for this. Coffee. This daily supplement heightens her awareness and provides her with the necessary calories to start the day. But what if she could do more with the coffee? Perhaps paint with it? Greetings and salutations. I'm Sky and I make art. And today I make art with coffee. I'm no stranger to coffee spills. I spill coffee in basically every feasible way and place. The floor, my projects, my lap, you name it. So you would think that with all this extensive knowledge and research I've conducted into the field of coffee stains, I'd want to keep it as far away from my art as possible. But not today. So I started out this painting by imagining what coffee might look like as a person. Would they be tired, jittery? I don't know. But then I realized that the incarnation of coffee was just a college student, so I scrapped that idea. I went through a lot of different drafts and brainstorming, but in the end I decided to do something more traditional, but with a twist. So, meet Gregory. He's an average kind of fellow, 5'11", give or take, a little shy, and apprenticing at a coffee shop to learn the basics of wizarding magic. Things like temperature spells, levitation, multitasking, and of course, showmanship. I also made him a coffee pot hat based on like an old coffee pot I found, but in the end, it didn't really fit into the composition, so maybe I'll reuse it for a future design. I actually ended up so in love with the final drawing that I didn't want to sacrifice him to the experiment. But if I don't find out the difference between painting with coffee and watercolor, who will? So I did the only reasonable and responsible thing that I could possibly do in this situation. I filmed the sacrifice for your enjoyment. Sacrifice. Anyway, I started out by making a fairly normal batch of coffee, except I brewed it for longer, included less water, and I ran it through a coffee strainer, which is something that I don't normally do. Normally I'll run it through like a metal sieve filter thing to get rid of any sort of like grit, coffee lumps, I don't know, whatever you want to call those. The little gritty bean grit. Yeah, that. Because I have a French press, so that's what I use. But I decided to run it through a coffee filter this time so I can get as much of a purified, clarified mixture as I possibly could. And coffee also has like a little bit of oil in it naturally from the beans, so I figured it might age better if I got rid of that. And I wanted to get rid of any sort of like coffee silt, the stuff at the bottom of the cup. I'm not really sure if that would have affected the final piece or not, but I'm a perfectionist. What can I say? I'm a coffee paint purist. Gotta do my best work. Yeah. So I finished my sketch, did my line art, and got prepared to paint with coffee with my usual supplies. Water, pigment, which is coffee in this case, and paper towels for wiping the brush off on. So let's give this a try. Not as pigmented as I'd hoped. I tried layering it a bit to build the color, but it just wasn't working. So I got my base tones in, and then I went back to the kitchen to reduce it. And then we paint to reuse it. And whatever's left over, my body can take care of recycling. You know, take care of the earth, it'll take care of you, all that stuff. But back to the first step. Painting. I boiled the coffee down until I thought it was kind of syrupy, I guess. Thick enough. Yeah. I hoped it was thick enough. And by the time I was done with it, it was definitely a lot more black than brown. Although on the page it still looked brown, so I guess I didn't burn it too badly. The pigment was definitely more concentrated after I did this, although it really wasn't the darkest, so maybe I should have distilled it more. But I was worried that if I distilled it too much, I wouldn't have enough to finish the painting. For this piece, you may notice I'm using different brushes than I usually do. This isn't because I killed my old brushes doing something reckless, or because my dog ate my brushes. It was because I was concerned the coffee might, ruin the brushes somehow, or make them smell like coffee, and as much as I love coffee, I don't really want my brushes to be scratch and sniff brushes. So I thought if I just used my other brushes, we would be safe. And they're pretty decent brushes, even if they aren't the best. I've painted with them before, and yeah, they're pretty good anyway. And as any good scientist, I took meticulous notes on the properties of coffee as I worked. And that's why you're really here, right? Not for the challenge, not for the art, for my findings in the brave new field of food paint research. Yeah, of course you were. Why would I ask such a silly question? Anyway, my notes on the properties of coffee in the field of paint research. The coffee, I noticed, had some interesting qualities to it. It did behave somewhat like watercolor, as I was kind of expecting and hoping it to behave as. However, the coffee seemed to have a mind of its own. It dried like a shade or two darker than it was when I put it down. So, for instance, I put down blush and I thought, oh, it's barely gonna show. But then I looked back over at it and it was like way dark. I'm not sure if this was due to oxidation or maybe as the water evaporates the pigment being more concentrated just makes it look like way darker. I know that acrylics do this, so I don't know, some sort of weird thing going on there. If anyone has any guesses, I would love to know what you think. I also noticed that it made these like hard edges no matter what I did. And with watercolor, that sort of thing only happens when you put like a puddle of watercolor down. So I was trying to avoid that, and I did avoid that. But no matter what I did, how even the layer, how thin the layer, there was always those hard edge rings that are so coffee stain like. And I always figure that was because, oh yeah, people drop coffee in like a puddle, but nope, that's just the coffee. So I went back and I softened up some of the edges, but I left most of whatever it did just alone because I figured it's part of the coffee, I guess, and it looks kind of cool. As I noted, I wasn't able to build the color up much. I'm not sure if using better paper, like watercolor paper, would have fixed this, but I'm thinking probably not, since the coffee isn't super pigmented. I think it might have just been lifting what was underneath it. Because as I said, I could soften some of those edges that were hard. So that tells me that it probably was lifting to some degree. So maybe if I had boiled it down more, it would have worked better. And one last thing, and I'm not sure if I'm hallucinating this, if I really can tell a difference, but I feel like I could pick up less water than I would have normally been able to with watercolor, like less pigment. I'm not sure if this is because I was using different brushes than I normally do, or if it was because of the coffee itself. And like I said, I have used these brushes before for other things, and I don't remember that happening. I think it literally is just the coffee. But then again, maybe my coffee this morning was a little bit off, and now I'm seeing things, and I don't know. Maybe I'm hallucinating. Who's to say? And this concludes my segment on the behavioral patterns of coffee in the field of art. So back to our regularly scheduled program. So, concluding thoughts here. Would I recommend this medium to you? No. Would I steer you away from it? Also no. It just takes a lot of time to prepare to get those darker shades. So, if you're willing to do that, then absolutely have a crack at it. Will I be using this for more pieces in the future? Also, probably no. again, too much work. I am a lazy bones, not gonna do that. And update on the brushes and the piece itself. Do they smell like coffee? Yes, they do smell like coffee. However, I did go back to smell my piece again later, and I did notice that it smelled way less like coffee, so I'm thinking that the smell will dissipate eventually, and then that gives me hopes for my brushes, but we shall see. That's why I use the not so good brushes. Anyways, hope you enjoyed, and catch you later, my lovelies.